Relooted. It reached its intended audience of 53 people, a third of whom were streamers, who mocked the shit out of it, and then it disappeared. To be forever forgotten, not even to be remembered as a massive woke failure like Dustborn or Concord, but simply as a video game who failed to understand anything about video games or what its intended audience was supposed to be, and died with a whisper rather than a roar. But it does raise some interesting questions like, who the hell thought this was a good idea to begin with? Black people steal shit, the video game? God, Jesus. And how on God's good earth is this the largest video game project ever developed in Africa? Sub-Saharan Africa, at least. Well, I have found this little silly interview from late last year, with Ben Myers, the CEO of Nyamakop, the studio behind Relooted, and it really does explain quite a lot of this. How the game came to be, how its focus came to be so wildly off base and center, and why it earned nothing in terms of an audience, while still also being apparently covered by every news outlet on the planet. As that was the amusing thing as well. This was every activist's wet dream video game, and everything from BBC to Kotaku to Polygon, everybody talked about it, which you would think would guarantee some sales, right? But no. And the reason is made rather clear in this fascinating little interview on a tiny little YouTube channel. So, Ben Myers of Nyamakop here, and I do find it fascinating that the biggest creative in the African gaming market is a white man doing an interview with another white man, and a token native, I presume, but oh well, details. So, Nyamakop was, during the development of Relooted, the biggest game studio in Africa with a whopping 31 employees. Apparently, game development is not a very big business in Africa at all. And he goes on at length to explain that, there really isn't a whole lot of talent locally, and finding people, especially management, is extraordinarily difficult, which immediately then raises the question, how the hell did you even manage to make a studio in this area to begin with? And he elaborates a little bit on this, although he remains vague. He states that Nyamakop's first game was a PR success, but not a financial success. It got him a lot of acquaintances, and it opened the correct doors for him, which means in essence that, he got a hold of emails to people in government and where to apply for public grants, which isn't even as corrupt as it sounds, unfortunately. This is pretty much industry standard here. It was the same story behind Dustborn, for example, which leveraged the Norwegian state's infinite naivete to basically keep the studio running, and will keep the studio running ad infinitum, as once you're on the inside of this club, well, you pretty much just got a straw right down into the taxpayers' wallets, and you can keep yourself employed for the next 50 years by just draining them of their taxpayer cash. It is unfortunate, but hardly all that rare or unusual. And you can also tell that these were definitely governmental agencies as well, because it came with what I presume to be a lot of interesting little caveats there. For example, he talks about the inspiration behind the game and the target audience being not Africans, but African Americans, which he claims apparently 70% of which play video games. Now, that is an interesting statistic, as, yeah, absolutely. If you know of a demographic, 70% of which play video games, that is an obvious core audience you should be focusing in on. But what video games do we think that the African American audience primarily plays? Is it puzzle platformers? No. I haven't even looked it up, but I am pretty gosh darn confident in asserting that it's probably sports game and action games. And I would also imagine it is the most cliched and mainstream of these things as well. You know, Madden 257 Ultimate Football American Ball Edition, whatever, or Call of Duty 27 or whatever we are on right now. And he even mentions in the interview that initially they were planning on making a puzzle platformer until they began researching more about what the African American audience actually played. And then they discarded that idea immediately. And hey, listen, no shade from me. I fucking hate puzzle games too. Which means, I know the reason why you hate them. Oh. But then the interesting thing comes in, and this is what I think we can pretty much nail down that they have received a lot of government funding, because if this was indeed the fact, what would you actually make? So he states that he wanted to make a game about African joy rather than African pain. And you know what? That actually sounds like a great idea to me. Something positive, rather than we were slaves in America, whilst there are active slave markets in fucking Nairobi right now, or Kenya or Sudan. I don't know, I haven't checked this either, but I'm pretty sure they exist, just on a wild hunch here. Instead, then focusing on something positive, something emancipatory, if you will, forgive me for using the rather cliched term, something powerful. But then, how the did that turn into Steal Shit Simulator? Well, because if I'm thinking about that, what would I make? Well, I'd make, surely there's African mythology, right? Make a story about a brave young hero fighting the gods or something, running through the savannah, firing thunderbolts, or whatever crazy action-packed nonsense you've got. The Zulus, for example, have a sort of kind of funding myth of Shaka Zulu, how he got his famous spear from a demon and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. There's guaranteed to be all kinds of ideas precisely like it, but that, of course, would be one local group's mythology. Instead, what I suspect he's done here is get multiple grants from multiple different countries, and so he kind of committed himself to representing multiple countries' history with little slices here and there, so that he could write out a proposition document to send off to these nations and go, listen, we're gonna show your nation's national treasures on screen. Oh, that's amazing. What are you gonna show? Well, we're gonna show the silver bull from the slave, powerful empire of Dahomey. Are you gonna mention how that was, you know, Amazons and tearing people apart with their bare hands, or, you know, the mass slavery they committed? No, we're gonna omit all of that. Oh, in that case, here, have some government money. Absolutely. So, and therein comes also the effect of stealing, right? Because now you can't do a single form of mythology. You can't do one history. You can't even do an ensemble cast of characters. You've got to touch upon everything. How do you do that? Well, a lot of these artifacts are in European museums, precisely because putting them in a European museum is primarily what gives them value to fucking begin with. Listen, there's going to be a whole load of African artifacts still in Africa, the majority of which are simply not recognized as artifacts because the West haven't bothered to classify them as such. And I imagine the entirety of the African archaeological community is composed of about 7 people on a good day. But this also, of course, comes where they begin to lose the market audience. So, the core audience for this is African Americans, mind you, right? But then you focus almost entirely on just African culture. And furthermore, you don't want to make it Afro-futuristic. You don't want to make it Wakanda. You want to make it Nairobi, but tomorrow. Or Kenya, and tomorrow. And, not just, a nation being reclaimed by nature as vines begin cracking the beautiful European concrete laid down to run cars over. You need a futuristic idea of that country. Which is also why, supposedly, they went around to the various nations putting in a great deal of effort to find local voice actors, which, considering the downright racist voice acting of the Chinese fishmonger in the game, is an interesting admission. I guess they didn't bother with him. Or that is apparently an authentic local dialect, which you might actually be even funnier now that I think about it. But anyways, this of course then had the problem of undermining the entire point of the game. You were now no longer making a game for the African American community, you were making one for the African community. But the Africans apparently just don't play video games much at all, which is why you aim for the African American community to sell your games to instead, which you then undercut by doing all of this nonsense. And perhaps most intriguingly of all, he enters into a point of the interview where he discusses whether or not an audience even exists for games like this. And with that he means specifically games with an African theme to it, specifically African video games. Not just made in Africa, but about African subjects as well. And he mentions that there has basically been no data to support this supposition whatsoever, and that Relooted would be an experiment to figure out if this audience exists. And well, I think that experiment can be safely declared to have been a massive success in that it has positively identified that no such audience actually exists. Though, I've also then hastened to add that he didn't create a game for the actual gamers. As he also points out in the interview, the people who were actual gamers who saw the game near universally responded with, "What is this woke garbage? You're making a video game about black people stealing, and you're calling that a joyful African video game? A joyous experience? What? Your bike was promised to me 3,000 years ago, and the only way I can achieve happiness is by taking your form of locomotion." Okay, an intriguing stance from a white man in South Africa. Absolutely. One I deeply disagree with incidentally, but okay then. So all of the gamers were, "This is woke garbage," we're obviously not going to play it. But then he points out that there were other groups of people who would watch the trailer over and over again, who would share it, who would click on it, who would constantly revisit it. These, of course, were the activists, the African activists in particular. Those who would have embraced African futurism, but who don't give a fucking flying shit about what Nairobi will look like tomorrow, because their idea of Africa isn't Kenya, it isn't Somalia, it is Wakanda, in essence. Simple as. And apparently there wasn't enough Wakanda in the video game. Furthermore, as he also says in the interview, these people buy like 2 video games a year, and so attempting to sell a game to them, well, not to get too ethnical here, but that does feel a lot like trying to sell sand in the Sahara, doesn't it? And he also mentions then the massive amount of coverage the game got, which also was from non-gamer sources. He was covered in all kinds of news outlets and mainstream pages, but very few, if any, actual video game outlets of niches or YouTubers or personalities with any kind of street cred, to put it like that, within the gaming community, which just goes to prove that, well, this was a video game that was specifically not made for people who play video games. Instead, it was apparently tailor-made and did indeed appeal to the people who don't buy video games. Oh, they'll talk about them, they'll mention how this is incredibly good and how this is a super powerful moment in African history, whilst writing an article for the fucking BBC, of course, but they won't pick up a copy. And if they do, it'll be a review copy, which they'll put in the game, play for 4 or 6 hours, make a beautiful review claiming it's absolutely amazing, while saying nothing about the game because A, they didn't pay attention, or B, they've never played a video game before, which will convince absolutely nobody, especially as nobody goddamn reads those reviews anymore. Like, I'm not shitting you here. Like 80% of the traffic to video gaming sites, quote unquote, these days simply come from guides and walkthroughs. That's why all of these companies want to make as many basically AI guides as possible on every single puzzle and problem in the video game. That's why, and this is kind of a benefit, whenever you're stuck in a video game and you write in a very vague and loose description of the general problem into Google, there'll be 75 answers, because that's the only traffic these pages get anymore. But, at the end then, will this actually destroy the company? No, because Nyamakop was never dependent upon sales. They are not a company making video games for gamers. They are an activist company that survives near exclusively, one would imagine, of governmental grants. Their income comes not even nearly, but entirely from their ability to virtue signal to the correct crowd. And in that regard, Relooted has actually been an absolute smashing success. Now, I will also mention that most of these grants do also have certain requirements for sales as well, so they might be falling short on that one, but I suppose we'll have to wait and see. Nevertheless, it has been a rather revealing little interview provided here by Ben Myers, both as to the state of the African games industry in that it doesn't exist, basically, and that it can only apparently be produced by, well, as one of the interviewers said, people like you. Many valuable lessons has once again been learned, although most of them were things we already knew. Like, for example, if you're going to make a video game, make it for actual gamers. And if you also have a core audience in mind, try to appeal towards it rather than the people that you yourself know don't actually play games. Relooted, everyone. A infinitely forgettable video game that will only serve as a forgettable reminder that the woke don't push copies of anything. They can't make anything a success, no matter how many activists, no matter how many mainstream pages you seduce, no matter how many groups of people who claim to have it as their job to shift public opinion you appeal to, they will not shift a single goddamn copy. In fact, making your game into YouTube bait based on how awful it looks is statistically a superior sales strategy. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.